Hello everyone, Lone Warfare. Welcome to the Week 4 episode of the Chaos Report for the Blight Challenge League. In this video, I'll be restocking our diminished unique item watchlist. We'll also be taking a quick look at the current meta, as well as taking a usual look at the blighted map market. Lastly, we'll be covering the basics of T16 map sustain in the strategy section of this episode. As always, you can find the timestamps to each section in the pinned comment down below. Also, do keep in mind that these are educated guesses or predictions, and as such, they might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that seem obvious to many, and for that, I apologize. It's hard to cover everything after all. If I do miss something you think is important, leave it in the comments down below, I read them all. What that means, of course, is invest at your own risk. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right in. The first segment always leads with currencies and commodities, and this episode's no different. Exalted Orbs are, of course, leading the pack. They have, since last week, risen by another 5 chaos, which at this point just sounds like I'm a broken record. They've been remaining steady at this price point for a while, however, which might indicate a future drop. However, this is obviously 100% conjecture, as the Exalted Orb price behavior this league is completely unprecedented, and there's no way to tell what will actually happen with them. They'll likely drop at some point, and considering that this is the first plateau of the league, after which a drop is usually in order, we might see a 5 to 10 chaos dip in the next week. Maybe. However, do keep in mind that items will still retain their exact same salted prices, so don't go running to try and convert them all to chaos, just to save yourself a few dozen or a few hundred chaos, as that's not how the PoE economy works. Exalted Orbs are the main currency used for high-level trades, and as such, will always have the 1x value, and items priced at that value dip and rise in prices together with the Exalted Orbs. For farming purposes, please refer to the last 2 to 3 weeks worth of episodes, as I've already covered a ton of different options to farm divination cards for Exalted Orbs already, and I'm not going to repeat them here. I'll be ending this part of the Exalted Orb price analysis by continuing to implore you to check Exalted prices regularly yourself during the next week, as the prices are impossible to properly predict, and they might rise or drop at a moment's notice. The Alteration Orbs are continuing to follow our predictions to the letter. They have risen rapidly over the past few days to the current 5.5 to 1 ratio. They are also projected to rise farther, as their climb is influenced by the major shift in the meta that we're going to cover in the meta analysis, which in turn is pushing people more towards Alt plus Regal crafting. Since their rise is influenced by a major meta shift rather than a short-term streamer influence, we'll likely see these prices continue to rise and also stick around the newly increased price point for a while. Whether or not we're going to see them rise to the crazy high prices from the last league is still open, but it could definitely happen, as a result of the shift in combination with the reduced alt drop rates comparatively to Legion. While the blighted maps do drop quite a lot of them, it is still nowhere near the amount that got pumped into the economy during Legion. As a result, we'll likely see them increase in prices farther for these following days, but they'll likely cap out at about 4.5 to 5 alts per chaos at most. However, with them being at an above 6 to 1 ratio, it is now profitable and advised to lightly lower the restrictiveness of your loot filter, and allowing T2 rare jewelry to be shown, so you may pick them up during your mapping or delving content to increase your hourly yield of currency. Every map should be able to net you an additional 2 or 3 chaos that way at the least. Ancient Orbs have, similarly to the Alteration Orb, followed our predictions from last week. I explained how the Headhunter and Ancient Orbs influence each other's prices, and warned about the Headhunter prices increasing, which would lead to Ancient Orbs increasing as well a few days later. This has indeed happened, as Ancient Orbs have risen since Tuesday of last week, the release of the last episode. They have since reached a plateau of about 55 chaos, however their buy price is substantially lower at the current moment in time. Be aware of potential scam attempts or price fixing here. The price increase requires no further explanation, as looking towards last week's episode. If you haven't done so already, feel free to check it out on my channel. As for my predictions for this following week, we have to quickly take a look at the Headhunter unique belt. It is currently slowly dropping in price, which will affect the prices of Ancient Orbs in a similar manner in the coming days. In conclusion, we'll likely see Ancient Orbs fall again in direct response to the Headhunter prices slightly dipping. However, I would not imagine a gigantic price drop, as the Headhunter prices have diminished only slightly. Expect a 5 to 10 chaos drop at best for Ancient Orbs. Following that, we've reached the new Blighted Maps area of the Chaos Report, so let's take a look at how the Blighted Maps have changed their prices since last week. The overall prices for pretty much all the Blighted Maps have mostly stayed the same, more or less. We see the majority of white maps stick around the 20 chaos price point, while a few higher tier white maps have managed to climb to their old 22 chaos price point again. Same recommendations as last week. I would recommend skipping encounters below the 5 chest minimum if you're running on a fast build. If you're in need of currency, however, of course, run them all, as they do drop quite the decent amount of extra currency per map, and thus make it more efficient per map ratio rather than per hour, regardless of lane count. Also, remember to always press that little button on the bottom right to speed up the process. Nobody really needs 20 seconds of time to build towers at the start of every single encounter. It's rarely ever needed for pretty much all builds in the game, so just skip it. The more expensive yellow maps have placed themselves at around 30 to 40 cows, depending on the base map tier. This represents a small decrease in prices since last week. However, it is not a substantial enough difference to cover it in depth here. It's simply a few outlier maps that have adjusted their prices more towards the center, rather than an overall decline in popularity for these maps. The most expensive blighted maps are still the tier 15 red maps, just like last week of course, which have all found themselves at about 120 cows each, representing a slight drop since last week's episode. The other red tier blighted map of interest are all above or at tier 13. Each of those maps, of course meaning tier 13 and above, excluding tier 15, go for about 89 to 95 cows each at the current moment. This shows a slight rise in prices by about 5 cows each, as more players have picked up on the high profitability of running these maps. They could continue to rise in the future due to the low drop rate of them and the increased demand, as more and more players are switching their builds towards blighted farming ones, as well as more players realizing that this can make them an easy pile of currency. For farming blighted maps, the same rules apply as last week. The highest possible map you can run is the best map to farm in. I'll of course recommend your favorite tier 16 for those juicy tier 15 blighted map drops. With those currencies and blighted maps covered, let's move on to our unique item watchlist. It currently consists of only 2 unique items, however we'll be restocking the watchlist up to 4 today, meaning we'll be adding 2 additional uniques, as we removed the primordial jewels as well as the devouring diadem last week. The transcendent flesh is the first one on our list, so let's see how it behaved since last week. As predicted, it continued its rise to a decent price point of about 176 cows, however has had a large drop in the last day or two. This drop is not really reflected on much of the trading side and seems to be mostly represented on PoE Ninja, which leads me to believe this might be an outlier, especially considering that a ton of these jewels are still selling for exactly 1 exalted orb. However, do enact caution when trying to trade with these jewels as a result. As always, with these 2 jewels as well, keep in mind that you can create your own Transcendent Flesh with a Vial of Transcendence, a Tempered Flesh, as well as a tier 3 Sacrifice Room in Alva's Temple. At the moment of running this part, it will run you about 52 cows total, netting you a profit of about 125 cows, if you intend on selling the resulting Transcendent Flesh for about 0.9 exalted orbs, which seems to be the lower end of the sales spectrum at the moment. Sellers that list for lower than that have not answered any of my whispers, so I assume those are price fixers. In Legion, these jewels were insane in terms of prices and were super popular among Cyclone builds specifically. The usage stats of this jewel also reflect this, as 67% of all users of this jewel are running Cyclone. With the recent rise of Cyclone's popularity, we can expect this jewel to stay more expensive, rather than dropping back down to its pre-rise 80 cows price point. It might still see a slight dip or 2 in the next week, but that will depend entirely on the popularity of the league, and people re-rolling, so keep an eye on it for this week if you intend on either picking it up or selling one yourself. Moving on to one of my favorite flasks in the entire game, as well as by far the most expensive one, the Bottled Faith. It has since last week increased its price further, and is now sitting snugly at an insane 27 exalted orb price point, or about 5,240 cows each. The reason for the prices have been explained enough in the last episodes, and I'll just skip them here. One update since last week, however, it seems that the Cortex encounter can start spawning in tier 12 maps already, rather than the tier 13 we've warned about since the first week. What leads me to believe this are multiple reports from viewers that have received them at tier 12, and also the fact that Synthesis itself had this exact same requirement. Furthermore, when you look for the lowest eye level drop uniques of the Cortex encounter, you will see that they all sit at eye level 81. T12s naturally drop eye level 79, which means that unique encounters will drop +2, as always, meaning the boss specifically would drop eye level 81 unique items. I've personally not received the Cortex encounter yet, but I also haven't ran any Zanas since last week, as I've personally been busy trying to run my 60+ June encounters that have stacked up due to the fixed crashes, so my apologies for no personal information there. If you have received the Cortex encounter in any map lower than tier 12, please provide a screenshot of this to me, so I can update this information next week's episode in case there's a mistake. To wrap this one up, I'm not entirely sure if this flask will ever drop at this point. It's not really doing anything except rise in price and then sit there for a while just to rise again in the future. Due to this binary nature, we might remove it from the watchlist in future episodes, but for now we'll keep it and take a look at it again next week. Following that, we're about to meet our first new arrival, the Casparis Malice. Always popular, just to different degrees, this weapon represents the staple of cast-on crit weaponry. With the recent rise in popularity of cast-on crit Cyclone Assassins, this item has seen an equally drastic rise in price, waking it from its long sleep at the 50 chaos price point. It has since then risen to over 180 chaos at the moment of writing this part and is projected to rise even further. Due to the nature of the weapon, every build will require 2 of them, further increasing the demand for it and shortening the supply. Depending on how many players decide to re-roll into a COC build, we could see this weapon easily rise over an exalted orb in prices in the following week. Furthermore, this weapon is one of the hardest unique weapons to target farm, as it only drops semi-reliably from 2 different divination cards, of which both roll on a large table, meaning it's hard to actively try and supply this weapon to the market. If you do intend on trying to go for it though, you'll be looking for the Gentleman divination card, which drops exclusively in the Get Home map. We'll see how the prices develop over the next week. If they continue their drastic course, I'll be covering a few farming strategies for Ghetto specifically, so you can go and supply this item in case you want to. Next up, the second new addition, Double-Socketed Tomb Fists. Similar to the Casparis Malice, this item has seen a large increase in popularity in the last few weeks, due to more and more players switching off of their summoner starters and onto more attack-based builds. Of course, throughout the league, it has already seen a large popularity due to Tornado Shot and Scourge Arrow builds, which have been popular since the very beginning. However, as even more demand gets put into the market for one particular item, the prices will naturally increase, which is what we've seen for this glove these past weeks. It is now sitting at an around 650 chaos price point, which has been steadily going up. It will likely retrain this trajectory and slowly continue rising in prices, similar to the Casparis Malice, as more and more players switch over to attack-based builds. This glove represents one of the strongest options for glove slot for any attack build, due to its double Abyss Jewel sockets and the intimidation feature it provides. This gives the item nearly unparalleled customization potential, as it can simply change your jewel setup, rather than having to recraft an entire item, while also retaining a large portion of its benefits. I don't think I need to mention how to acquire this one, however I will advise you to farm it in tier 16 maps, as that will also grant you eye level 83 Abyss Jewels, which you can craft to make a decent sum of money, or prepare yourself for the inevitable drop in usage of these gloves. Also, keep in mind that the Zana Abyss mod can also generate additional map drops, though rarely. As such, it represents a very cheap option to make some additional currency, provided you run in tier 16s for the eye level 83 Abyss Jewel drops. Now, moving on to our third segment for this video, the good old meta analysis. Comparatively to last week, there have been large changes to the meta overall. We've seen an over 2% drop in Necromancer players, which have redistributed among the lower percentage ascendancies. However, on the main skill usage, we've seen an over 2% rise for Cyclone users, as mentioned previously in the unique item watchlist. This 2% increase represents a large shift in the meta. While 2% might not sound like much, this is only the characters that are level 95 and above, and as such, a 2% increase in 1 week is a large amount of players leveling their Cyclone characters to this point. The Cyclone characters are mostly assassins at the moment, opting for a cast-on crit build using Casparis Malice mostly, but Juggernauts and Slayers are also representing a very large portion of this user base, and they are rising. Expect to see Alteration Orb prices rise in the future, as well as melee uniques to increase in price. Things such as Starforges, Calm's Hearts, and Lion's Roars could see a bump in price fairly soon, depending on how many players follow or are already part of this new trend. For now, summoner items still sell the most, but well-rolled melee items are definitely rising in popularity, so look out for that. As for the Atlas analysis, please refer to the last 3 episodes for recommendations, as they are all still holding true. Additionally, pretty much every map is viable to run this league, so feel free to find your own personal favorite. That's it. It's the entire Atlas analysis for this week. No real changes to anything, so sorry for that. With the meta and Atlas analysis finished, let's move on to our discussion and strategy segment. I'm currently working on a complete and ridiculously in-depth guide on map investment, however, that one is still months out from being completed. Due to the finishing of that series being questionable in terms of time and effort, I'll be going over map sustain in general and giving a specific example on how to manage and properly invest into your eldered maps using my own Atlas setup in this episode already, as many viewers have requested this. Map sustain has been a hotly discussed topic for a few leagues now, often leading with the issue of not being able to sustain red maps, and specifically T16 eldered maps. As GGG rebalances the map drops every league, in order to keep it at a certain level rather than letting it swing wildly based on the league mechanic and the quantity of loot it provides, it is hard to get an exact measure of sustain over a large enough sample size to really give accurate data on whether or not sustain overall has improved or decreased drastically from league to league. What map sustain describes, in specific, is the amount of maps you drop, which are the same tier of the map you ran in the first place. A map sustain ratio of 1 would mean that you drop exactly the same number of maps as you run of the same tier, whereby a ratio of 2 would mean you drop twice as many, etc. For Elder setups, such as the Tier 16 Elder Precinct presented here, your goal is at least a ratio of 1, as you want to be able to infinitely sustain the map while you're running it. Oftentimes, players try to gain the highest ratio in order to over-sustain maps, to better prepare the right maps for the right investment options, which I'll cover a bit later. Sometimes simply sell them for profit as well, as future-proof yourself from bad Orangey Streaks. As we've already arrived at it, this is the main reason for the large divide and discussion about map sustain in the community. The RNG inherent in this game, and specifically the map drops. RNG streaks can heavily swing in either direction, and especially early on when you're just getting started with red maps or your Elder setup, and your map pool isn't the biggest, a bad RNG streak can lead to a very frustrating gameplay experience, as you will completely run out of maps to run of the tier you desire to. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not commenting on whether I find this league to have low sustain or not. I'll leave that to other content creators to discuss until I have some hard data to present. As a result, I would recommend waiting on passing your judgment on the matter for further into the league. Once you have at least 140, 145 Atlas competition and a large enough map pool to sustain a bad RNG streak, I would recommend at least 20 maps for that original starting pool for your Tier 16 setup, wherever it might be. For investment that you should know about to run these maps, let's quickly cover the different ways you can invest in them, what is considered optional, and what is a must-have to sustain your Tier 16 Eldered map. Quality Algs and Vals. This is a must-have. This is the most common form of map investment and is basically used since Tier 1. For your Tier 16 Elder setup, you pretty much expect it to 20% quality every single one of your maps using cartographer chisels. Just keep in mind to scour the map first to save chisels. Then alking the map and re-rolling if necessary, and finally valing it. This will give you a large variety of differently modified maps, some of which will be unrunnable for you. Sort out maps with any form of reflect in a special area of your map stash, so you don't accidentally run them. We'll get back to them later. Map device Zana mods, equally a must-have. This is another one of those investment options that most players know and utilize already, but I want to emphasize that this one is a necessity at Tier 16. The best option at the moment is Harbinger by a landmile. Due to the extremely high prices of Ancient Orbs this league, you'll usually end up turning a profit, as well as getting a large amount of extra mobs, which can lead to vastly increased map drops. I would basically never recommend anything outside of Harbingers, as it outshines everything else by a large margin. There are specific uses for the other mods, however, covering every use and interaction would be too much for this video, so just go for Harbingers for now, as that's always a good pick. I'll be covering those in the in-depth guide in a future video. Sextants, also a must-have. These things are pretty goddamn important. They represent a large portion of the mob density in your map. You're specifically looking for sextants that read, add additional monsters. The only exception to this rule is monsters that convert. You want to reroll that, those are not good, they don't really drop anything. You should have 4 sextants active on your T16 whenever you run them at the least. There's also special sextants, such as you cannot take reflected damage, which is where you would use your previously put aside reflect maps. This sextant will make it possible for you to run those quote-unquote bricked maps. There's a ton to cover with sextants alone, and I'll make sure to include every single sextant option and what they are used for in the in-depth guide I'm working on. However, there is way too much for this episode, so just focus on the additional monsters mods for now. That should get you going. Elder and Shaper Ping Pong, also considered a must-have. Another large contributor to the overall mob density and drop rate of maps. This is something a lot of players forget or are too lazy to set up. It is, however, quite mandatory, as the Elder and Shaper mods spawned by the influence are some of the best map droppers in the entire game. Not to mention, if you're running tier 16s, you want those high eye-level Elder and Shaper bases to show up your profit ratios. To set it up, simply have Elder influence next to your map, either through a spawn Elder Guardian, Elder himself, or by keeping an Elder square in the area. This is the most common option, by the way. This will make Shaper spawn influence on your map, which when you run it will convert to Elder and then back to Shaper on the next run, provided you have Shaper influence around it afterwards. Scarabs, these ones are kind of optional. While not a must-have, it's definitely advised to use these, mostly rusted, Scarabs to improve your profit margins. I personally do not use any Scarabs, unless specific Sextants get rolled, like the Harbinger ones, but I cannot stress enough how much more currency you'll make per map. Simply buy these in bulk from other players and use them in every map you run. You want to make sure you also get the 5-slot map device before you start, as this will allow you to use one extra Scarab or additional Fragment or anything like that, so make sure you get that done. Fragments, also optional. These are definitely not a must-have, but a nice-to-have for sure. Especially when you run Nico on your T16s or you get a Sextant providing them for free, the sacrifice pieces provide a decent 20% extra quantity, which can swing the RNG in your favor, of course. If you're running a map with many bosses, such as Precinct, you pretty much have no excuse not to use them, as you will simply sustain them by running your corrupted maps, as every boss has a chance to drop a sacrifice piece in a corrupted map. Definitely advise buying these in bulk. Don't bother with the Immortal pieces, however, as they only give 5% more quant per piece than the sacrifice ones, but are magnitudes more expensive, so I would recommend sticking with the sacrifices. Prophecies, also kind of optional. Definitely not a must-have, however you should still keep your prophecies running 24/7. They add a nice amount of variance to your maps and keep it fresh, while also providing amazing currency making opportunities. Especially watch out for the Possessed Foe prophecy, which is currently worth about 20 chaos or something due to specific Sextant mods that exist. I know I've ran this one without thinking, before realizing it was worth this much. Another prophecy group to look out for while you roll them are the Tempest ones. Save those for your Nico missions, as they add 20% quantity to your map. If you follow all these must-haves on this list and are running a map with a decent monster count, you should be seeing your sustain be adequately high. Do keep in mind, however, that investment can also be affected by heavy Orangey Streaks. So make sure you get enough investment materials for your entire pool and you stock up early enough, as you will guaranteed not sustain your investment items, such as chisels, sextants, and scarabs. Also, keep in mind that despite doing everything right, you might still run out of your pool. Remember that Alva and Nico are great ways to supplement your tier 16 pool, and you should not skip out on them, if you intend on running an absolute ton of tier 16s this league. If you have any more specific questions about map investment and sustain, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. I'll reply to them directly or add them in a future episode. Now, for the last little segment, some rapid-fire farming and or crafting tips. First up, as always, the weekly delve update, as delving is still and will always be one of the best ways to make a large amount of currency in the game. Since last week, serrated fossils have seen a large increase in price. Prismatic fossils, however, have seen a 1 chaos drip since last week's recommendation. This does not change our recommendations for farming, however, as bound fossils have also continued their price drop, and corroded fossils haven't seen a large enough increase to change your preferred farming areas. So, same as last week, primary objective is Frozen Hollows, secondary is Magma Fissure. Happy fossil hunting. Serrated fossils currently sell at 19 chaos plus, enchanted fossils are still going for about 8 chaos, despite their short-lived price jump to 11 chaos. Pristines have been holding steady at 8 chaos right now, and as mentioned, prismatic fossils have dipped from 5 chaos to 4. As always, remember to save up a few and sell in bulk. Farming the Immortal Syndicate is currently one of the most worthwhile things you can do in the game. It is now possible to rather effectively farm them, even without a perfect board setup, due to the Mastermind changes. Once you've gotten the Mastermind intelligence filled, you can simply get the tier 3 character into the right area, run the Mastermind, and then redo the tier 3 setup while retaining the general intelligence level for each safe house. As a result, it is now way easier to acquire Syndicate-specific items such as pure breachstones for players with no board setup or the lacking knowledge of how to set one up properly. The current most worthwhile endeavors are Tier 3 Chameleon Intervention for the Gilded Sulfite Scarabs, as they net about 40 to 45 chaos each. Tier 3 Tora and Vegan Intervention as well, as they net Gilded Harbinger and Legion Scarabs respectively, netting about 30 to 35 chaos each. Tier 3 It That Fled in Research to craft yourself the pure breachstones. Even though Chameleon breachstones have dropped drastically in price, you'll still make about 100 chaos profit per breachstone. It might be worthwhile to go with Ul Nitol breachstone instead, as their profit margin currently lies at about 150 chaos instead. Chameleon will likely not stay this low, however, so choose whether you're going to invest long term or short term and act accordingly. Tier 3 Leo in Research to get free exalted slums. With the current prices of exalted orbs, this is the most plausible way to slam any item in the current economy. I've seen people sell these for 100 chaos plus before, but I would advise great caution due to scamming risks. Use it for your own items and try to hit something great. Especially on jewels such as abyssal ones, a 4th good roll can make the difference between a 30 chaos jewel and a 3 to 4 exalted orb one. As always, there's tons more options that I cannot possibly cover on this episode, so feel free to share your knowledge in the comments down below if you so choose. And with those last few tips wrapped up, I'll be ending this chaos report here. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you'd have wanted me to talk about anything specific that I might not have covered. If you want to support the creation of these videos, feel free to check out my Patreon and maybe consider signing up for it. You can find a link to it in the description down below. Any and all support is highly appreciated. If you have any suggestions for Patreon rewards that you guys would like to see, please let me know in Discord's feedback channel down below this video in the comments or on my Twitter. I read all of them. Furthermore, let me know if you'd like to see me cover a particular topic regarding Path of Exile. I'm always willing to explore new video types or add extra segments to this series. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thingamajig, like or dislike the video, and check me out over on twitch.tv/LonerWolf. You can find a link to my stream down below in the description as well. And with that, thanks for watching and keep farming those exos.